here in North America. Good evening if you're in Finland or elsewhere in Europe. I'm Tom, and this is Pekka. Welcome to our first collaborative live stream. How are you doing today, Pekka?
Well, I've been fiddling a lot with my microphone settings and they are still not working properly. So my apologies if the audio sounds bad, but I really need to get that solved. Other than that, I'm perfectly fine. We've got like -3 and a little bit of snowfall here, and I just got to go for a small bike ride out there on my 1952 single speed mopeds. How about you, Tom?
Good. Well, morning here. I have not been outside yet, but the weather sounds quite similar. We had a nice, bright, sunny winter day yesterday. We had about 30 centimeters of snow earlier this week, and it hasn't melted yet. So it's it's very pretty out there right now, which is great. So what we're doing here today is we're going to be talking about winter cycling, urban winter cycling. Pekka and I did a video a few weeks ago that some of you may have seen, in which we compared our two cities. I live in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Pekka lives in Oulu in Finland. Similar cities in some ways, but when it comes down to winter cycling, there's a lot of differences. And so we did a video a few weeks ago comparing the two, and we got a lot of great response. And we had a lot of people asking us to follow up and just do a conversation. So we thought we would do that. And so what we thought today we would do is just run the video and have a conversation between the two of us about some of the things that were raised, some of the differences between the two cities, what works for winter cycling, what doesn't work for winter cycling. And we welcome all of you as well. So if you've got a question or a comment, use the chat and we'll respond to as many as we can. We really want this to be like an open conversation between us and between you. So there you go. And we just got a comment from somebody from Vancouver. So welcome, everyone. Okay, what we'll do now is I'll start this video. We're just going to run through our video and we'll begin here. Pekka, you've got control of this. So why don't you set it up and we'll get started.
Yeah, and we can of course stop it and rewind it, and we're going to keep the video mute because the audio is not going to work through the live stream. But we've got the subtitles on to help everybody stay on track. All right, let's go. And just tell me whenever if you want to talk about something, if I should stop the video or rewind or so on. Let's go.
Okay, so I think we're going to. This is Pekka's intro in Oulu, but we're going to start here in Calgary. So we shot these on similar days. It was about -20 degrees Celsius. They were both on holidays, so there was not a lot of traffic out, foot or bike traffic. And this is in downtown Calgary. So one thing is about Calgary. Oh, I hear I'm echoing a bit here. So thanks for that, Pablo. Let me see if I can adjust something. Pekka, why don't you take it from here?
Yeah, sure. So I actually wanted to ask you, Tom, because you were walking your bike across the crossing. Do you really have to do that there?
Technically, I think the law would say you should walk across a crosswalk because it's a pedestrian space. And we do have this weird thing where cyclists are not permitted to be on sidewalks or in pedestrian spaces, but we're not that welcome on the road, so we kind of exist between the two of them. So I do find myself walking sometimes and maybe bending the bylaws a little bit in some cases, but mostly this one was just for me to get started.
So you technically you started on the sidewalk where you were not supposed to ride your bike.
Yeah, I was mostly just getting my camera set up and getting started. So I can make most of my trips without dismounting. Like I'm just going to switch microphones here and see if it helps with the echo a bit.
Yep. So let's continue. There's quite a lot of noise here, actually. I remember watching that. And somebody was commenting that it comes from a bus. I think, honestly, the buses are your worst problem, and things are pretty good. Most of that noise probably comes from private motor vehicles. But other than that, I wanted to say about this crossing time 18 seconds to cross the crossing. And we had to wait for over a minute and we hit the lights mid phase. So the waiting time is like, I don't know, 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes, 1.5 minutes, and then you just got 18 seconds to go.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that in the video. I hadn't When you're in a city for so long, you don't even think about these things. To think that the length of that is long, I hadn't thought about, but you're right. And I think the problem is because the lights are set by maximizing car usage. I don't think anyone is thinking about how this works for a person on a bike. And these are one-way street downtown, and so they really are about just like maximizing the flow of automobiles. And so I think that's probably where it was set. No consideration for cyclists or pedestrians in that case. What would you, Becky, you've looked at this before. What's a reasonable time to wait at a traffic light?
Sorry?
What do you think is a reasonable time to wait at a traffic light?
Well, less than a minute, definitely. I would say like maybe 30, 40 seconds. But again, I wouldn't like to have traffic lights at all. Of course, it's difficult to avoid them completely in today's cities, which are designed for motor vehicles. But if we are talking about what's the ideal solution, we shouldn't have them at all.
Yeah, well, that is a good point. We are far from that here, as we'll see. If you let that play, like I think one of the first things you noticed in watching this Calgary video was how many traffic lights I had to stop for. And again, I hadn't even thought about that before. I mean, we have a downtown grid, and so when you're driving your car or walking on foot, you're hitting a lot of intersections, and so there's just a lot of traffic lights. But in Oulu, one of the things I noticed in your video is there was not a lot of stops. Do you think it's planned consciously to avoid a lot of stops, or is it just like a side benefit of the system that's been set up?
So outside the city center, it's pretty much intentional because the city was, or at least the main bicycle routes were designed from the beginning so that they are not following the main car traffic roads. So we don't have major intersections that much on those streets. But still, I think in Finland, generally, people are still installing too much traffic lights, and they're still being told, even in the city of Oulu, the center of Oulu, replacing some crossings which do not currently have traffic lights, replacing them with traffic lights instead, and that is a really wrong direction, in my opinion.
I'll just say a word, maybe, if you want to let this play back about this, our downtown cycle track network. For all the limitations we have in cycling in Calgary, one of the big victories we had was this downtown network. And I think the one thing that Calgary did right was to build a network all at once. So we have two pretty solid north-south lanes, two pretty solid east-west lanes through our downtown. And what was good was it was all put in at the same time. We see a lot of other cities putting in one bike lane and then taking 2 years to assess if it works or not. And in the meantime, very few people use that bike lane because it doesn't take you anywhere and it doesn't connect to anything else. So I think by putting in a network all at once, I think that was one of the things that Calgary has done really well. I mean, that was 7 years ago, and we have not done a lot since then, but that was a big victory at the time.
That's wonderful, and I just can't imagine how it could feel like, because I've never really been in such a situation in my life where I wouldn't have had a cycle network in the city where I live in. And then suddenly having something like that is probably a huge change. There's a question, or actually comment from Rob from Vancouver, if I remember correctly. He's saying that he wishes that cities would reset their lights after rush hour. Why wait a minute when the street is empty? So I don't know if you do that in Northern America, but here at least, traffic lights can have several different programs throughout the day, depending on the traffic amounts and the time of the day and so on. So most of the traffic lights probably have 6 or 7 different programs, depending on if it's a rush hour or not. So do you know if that happens in your city?
I don't know. I know in the downtown network, I don't think they reset, but there is a system where if you're driving a car at the speed limit through some of them, they call it the green wave, you will hit the green lights if you're going the speed limit. But the speed limit on most of those downtown streets is 50 kilometers an hour, which is pretty tough to maintain on a bike. So, again, it's another sign of the system being set up for cars and not necessarily for people on bikes.
And still having 50 kilometers per hour in the city center, it's just insane.
Actually, I shouldn't say it's 50. We changed it last year to 40, which was a victory. I'm sorry. I'd forgotten about that. It's 40 now. What would you say the default is in Europe?
What's that?
What would you say the default speed limit is in most of the cities around you?
Well, it was a couple of years ago, I think, when the city center was changed from 40 to 30, and even still, it is a bit too
It's 30. Yeah.
fast. It's 30 now, and it should be more like 20. And do you, by the way, remember what is the grid size, like the distance between two traffic lights, for example, in your city? Because the grid in Oulu, city of Oulu, is really small. It's just 100 meters.
Oh, I'm not sure of the distance. But you raised a good point. You mentioned in the video about you're not a big fan of the grid, which surprised me. Um, can you elaborate on that?
So yeah, because basically the whole continent, the Northern American continent, is a one giant grid. Okay, I'm exaggerating a bit, sure. It's so boring, first of all. I understand it in small doses, like in city centers and so on, but when you go to like those medieval cities in Europe, they are oftentimes something completely different from grids. And well, our city is not medieval either, but that's just so much more fascinating.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think the risk that we see here in North America is we have a whole generation of suburbs that were not built on grids, and instead you have these really long circumnavigational or what's the word I'm looking for? These long curvilineal routes through suburbs with no cross streets and really like only one way in and out of a community. And to get around on foot or on bike is impossible. So compared to that, I'll take the grid any day.
Oh, oh, definitely. If that would be the only other option, then of course. But believe me, there's a lot of different options between those two extremes.
Yeah.
All right. So
Right.
hey, here I wanted to ask you because as I was mentioning about these green paint stripes here, which are of course not infrastructure, but I was a bit surprised to even see that they are this car driver here is waiting. Is there some specific reason why the bollards here between the drive lanes and the bike path actually end so early? This, of course, the video might change the perspective a bit, but it seems to me that's like 50 meters or something without any bollards.
Yeah, well, that vehicle that we see up ahead, that white vehicle is leaving, the parking lot of a shopping center, and so, it needs to turn left onto that one-way street, and, the bollards end early to give a turning r space for vehicles turning in and out of that shopping center, um, and I think the perception is that that street is pretty busy and the speeds are, 40 kilometers an hour. And so I think they've just given a lot of space for the vehicles to move in and out of that area. And then that green paint is supposed to indicate to the drivers that there's a bike crossing here as well. But, you know, this is not the cleanest one. It's definitely a problem. I've had to stop here all the time for vehicles that are oblivious to the fact the bike lane is there at all.
Yeah, exactly. So when there is no bollards there, it's so easy to them to just like turn left onto the bike path, and then suddenly they'll realize that, oops, I'm not supposed to be here, and then maybe turn on the drive lanes. I don't know.
Yeah, interesting. But yeah, the bollards, you definitely feel less safe when you're crossing that area on a bike. You feel less protected, absolutely.
All right.
I see a comment here about Finland, Pekka. Is this a city I've never heard of?
Yeah,
Rovaniemi? Did I pronounce it properly? Probably not.
very
Uh,
good.
that has a grid like reindeer antlers. That
Yeah,
must
that
be
is
the
actually
thing we're talking about.
yeah, it is actually quite famous for that. So it was that city, which is like the capital of Lapland. It's located at the Arctic Circle, so about 170 kilometers north from here, and it was destroyed very badly in the Second World War or the aftermath and so on. So when it was redesigned, the zoning plan actually resembles a reindeer head. It's really, really difficult to recognize it from the current map. You really have to know that it's there. But still, I like the idea, and it doesn't, in my opinion, make it any more difficult to navigate because those lines that make it an reindeer head or the antlers and so on, they are not exactly the only streets which are there.
Interesting.
But if you look at if you Google Rovaniemi and reindeer or Rovaniemi poro, which is the word for Finnish, in Finnish, you'll surely find those plants easily.
Interesting.
Right.
I hear you people saying there's still some weird audio feedback coming from, I think it's coming from my end. So I'm trying to figure it out, but bear with us while we work through this.
I'm trying to figure it out. All right. So have you ever paid attention to those walking signals being white?
Yeah, that was an interesting point you made.
Yeah.
No, I have never thought of this. What color are they in Finland?
They're green, like these here. Like the bike is also green.
So it's a green, like green is go, red is stop.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I don't know why they wouldn't be like that here as well.
And recently, because of self-driving cars and so on, they changed some of the road markings from yellow to white in Finland, which is usually yellow line is don't pass. And now they have been all changed to white, which with the snow really feels quite stupid.
Right. Oh, we've got some tech support on our chat here, Pekka. Do you see this? Someone's suggesting my audio is coming through on your speakers, and then it's being picked up by your mic. What a great group of viewers we have.
So I could try, of course, muting myself whenever I'm not speaking, but that would be constantly clicking on that one, and always I would be forgetting it. So I don't know. It could be. Is it unbearable?
Yeah. Keep telling us how it is. We appreciate the feedback. Let's keep going, and we'll see how we can do. So yeah, I think you've inspired someone out there. Maybe should start a lobby to change those pedestrian walk signals from white to green. Thank you, Pekka. If it does change, we'll call it like the Pekka rule or something. So this this downtown network for us in Calgary here is quite well maintained. The plows are out pretty early. There's a separate set of equipment that runs that clears the bike lane compared to the road, and so often they're quicker. They don't have as much to do, so the bike lane gets cleared before the road, which is amazing. And so, despite everyone always complaining about snow clearing, probably in every city in the winter world, everyone seems to complain about snow clearing. I think my city does a pretty good job on this downtown bike lane network.
All the time I'm forgetting to unmute myself while I'm doing that. So at least it looks really good to me, the snow clearing, I mean.
Yeah.
Here I wanted to talk about drainage, which is again one of my favorite topics. So even on
Oh, you muted yourself there, Pekka.
again. So as you can see, the bike path is heavily sloped towards right here because it was installed on an existing drive lane, I suppose. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, sorry, can you say that again?
So as you can see, the bike path is heavily sloped towards right side, and that's because there used to be a drive lane here.
Yes, that's correct.
And it's still the same asphalt there, just changed the paint and added the bollards and did nothing for the, like, what is called slope.
No, I don't think anything changed. I think they put up the bollards and laid the paint, and that was that. What would you say a best practice on a road like this would be?
It has to have a slope, of course, naturally. But in my experience, some of these kind of afterwards added bike lanes could be sloped too heavily, and an ideal amount would be like 2 or 3%. So have you ever thought about that it's sloped too steeply here, or have you ever ridden these with a 3-wheel cargo bike, for example?
There are other lanes that are sloped worse than this one, and it becomes a problem when they're slippery. When you're riding a bike and you hit ice, if you just keep things straight, you can usually just roll right over the ice, no problem. But if there's a slope, I often worry about my wheels slipping out sideways on it when the slope is too big. So that's the concern I have. This one's not as bad as some of the other ones, but it's definitely a
Yeah.
concern.
All right. So Tom, how is the drainage usually? Are there problems in Calgary with drainage on in the city bike network?
I've seen there's a couple of parts where the drainage, when the snow starts to melt and it pools and then freezes. Not in Calgary, I was in the city of Saskatoon, which is another Canadian city once, and somebody showed me a video of them riding in a bike lane where the drainage was so bad, there was so much ice that somebody was ice skating up the bike lane in the opposite direction to them. So we're not quite that bad, but it can be a problem. One of the things that I do all the time is the plowing in intersections. Often the bike lane will get cleared, and then the plow for the car lane comes along and pushes the snow, back into the lane, so that when you're trying to enter the bike lane, you've got a big windrow of snow in front of you. And I feel like that's a symptom of the city not removing the snow, rather just pushing it to the side.
I agree. It sounds exactly like that's the problem. So here, just an interesting point because we were picking up the speed with your frozen hub because you didn't have any blood gears, if I recall correctly, and you can see the countdown timer here for the traffic lights.
Yeah.
So, for example, in Finland, those countdown timers are still legal.
These are fairly new here, the countdown timers, but I read a study recently that said that they might actually make some problems worse because car drivers see them and they race through them. So are you saying in Alu they're not using them, or they're moving away from them?
No, we can't have those in Finland at all.
For that reason, you think?
I don't know. It could be part of the reason. And I remember visiting. I think it was in Moscow years back when travel there was still possible, even with your conscience and so on. Anyway, I could see numbers. If you were a pedestrian wanting to cross the street, you would have to wait like 3 minutes. So there's a number 180 seconds. So
I remember this too.
that could also like lead to some people just fucking hell. I'm not gonna wait 3 minutes here. I'm just gonna cross that. Right away.
Absolutely.
Imagine that could also be one of the reasons.
I feel like if your countdown timer has room for 3 digits, you're probably doing something wrong. Like, I'm just gonna grab another set of headphones and see if this will help our audio. I'll be right back.
Sure. So there's a comment on from the audience saying that Montreal removes the snow because they get too much snow to do otherwise. And Calgary historically relies on snow naturally melting, so it only pushes snow to the side.
I think that's true, and it's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's a cost issue, of course. Removing snow is more expensive. But you made a good point in your video too, Pekka, about designing a city with space for snow storage, which I don't think it's thought about a lot here in North America.
And it's a huge problem in Finland as well, especially in Helsinki, where during the recent years the winters have warmed up so much that first there was several winters with quite a small amount of snow. So then they cut down the amount of people able to remove the snow and so on. Then suddenly they had several winters with a lot of snow. So the whole city was almost paralyzed.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, the point I was making in my video later is that whenever you need to transport snow away from a snow snowfill, whatever you call that, snow dump. So all those resources are of course creating carbon emissions, and all those drivers cannot be doing the actual maintenance.
Yeah, that's
Always
also a good point.
Yeah, it's always better if you can just store the snow locally. Because when you're transporting snow, it's basically you're transporting air, because most of snow is just air.
Right. I hadn't thought about that. We have someone here from LA who's asking about snow removal. They've got snow in Los Angeles right now. So Who knew? These things are becoming relevant everywhere.
Climate is changing. The snow melted within like 3 seconds. Oh, so much traffic lights.
I'm just fiddling with my audio here. Okay, hopefully that helps a little bit. Yeah, one of the complaints about snow removal here in Calgary is that we rely on Mother Nature to do most of our snow removal. We push it to the side on the main roads, and then we just hope that it warms up to melt. So it's not a great system all of the time.
So it's good to elaborate between the words we are using. So if we are talking about snow removal and snow removal, some people could understand snow removal as regular winter maintenance, that you are removing the snow from the actual surface that you are supposed to be riding a bike on. And snow removal could be also understood as actually transporting the plowed snow away from that somewhere further away. So we should not mix these two things.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you.
Montreal uses hot water in tanks and puts the snow in that to melt it as they collect it. And yeah, you know that actually it sounds really stupid, but it's sometimes more environmentally friendly to use fossil fuels to melt the snow than actually transport it somewhere.
Right, that does sound counterintuitive, but if
Yeah,
you
it is.
assess it,
Unfortunately, it can be the case.
right. Okay, where are we here in Calgary? Still on a nice bike lane.
Which is about to end.
I think we're about to. I'm finally going to turn here. I know you're getting bored there, Pekka. So, just for you, I'm making a left turn.
Wonderful, thank you. That's so considerate. So,
Yes.
do you legally need to have this 50-kilometer speed limit here?
Yeah, this has changed now. It's 40 kilometers.
Okay.
But yeah, sorry. What was the question?
So, do you legally need to have the sign even though it's one way for motor traffic?
No, there's a default speed limit now of 40 kilometers per hour, and then they post signs when it's different than that. So I think since this video was shot, it's probably changed on that spot. I don't know that speed sign specifically, but I suspect that's probably come down.
No, that was not the point, but only people who are going to see this sign are people on bicycle and on foot, because nobody's going to be driving to this direction. Do you still need to have the sign?
Right. That is a great point. I hadn't thought about that. Why is this? Either the sign's facing in the wrong direction, or that sign is posted for cyclists. I can't imagine a 50 kilometer per hour sign for cyclists.
So there's a comment over there saying that it could be a leftover sign from when the road was two-way, if it was.
It could be, and it was, but it's been years since that changed.
Well, sometimes they forget signs for decades.
Yeah, it's not worth taking it down in their minds, I think, sometimes. Yeah, in answer to the question, the default in Calgary on residential streets is now 40 kilometers per hour.
So, the question to the audience, now that Tom put on the headphones, is the audio better? Or maybe I should put on headphones as well, so the audio couldn't be circulating that much.
And thank you for the IT help, everyone.
And here's another comment regarding the white colors. So just two white lines and a white sign with the snow.
For a pedestrian crossing, yeah. Yeah, white was just the default. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Maybe we should start a lobby for new colors here in Calgary.
Maybe.
Yes.
The sign is for the drivers doing the wrong way.
Maybe it's the sign is for the drivers driving in the bike lane, because it's not that uncommon that people turn into that bike lane.
Let me get my headphones.
Sure. Keep it playing, and then one thing that's interesting about this bike lane specifically is that it was put in as part of a wider network, but right around this point, originally it just stopped. The bike lane just ended. And it took maybe 5 years before the city found it in the budget to go back and then complete the lane that takes it all the way to a transit stop. So it seemed like this unnecessary gap in the network for years, but it finally got addressed. So, you know, I complain a lot about the gaps in the network in lots of cities, not just Calgary. And I feel like just making those little connections would just make it's so much easier to get around on a bike.
And here you're riding in the middle of the street.
Yes, we were off the bike lane onto just a sort of a typical residential street here. And yeah, I'm in the middle because that was the safest spot. That seems to be where the smallest amount of snert is. Snert, for those who don't know, snow plus dirt equals snert. And when you're riding a bike, that is the most dangerous thing that you can ride over. It's so unpredictable. Ice, I'm fine with. Thin snow, I'm fine with. Heavy snow, I'm fine with. But snert, it just seems to pick your bike up and move it in random directions. So I try to avoid snert at all costs.
I totally understand, because I would be riding in the middle of the street here as well.
And Pekka, you made a comment about this street, about the width of them, which, it gets worse later on. But it's an interesting point. There's this perception in our cities in North America that we don't add more bike lanes because there's no space for it. So to hear you laugh at that is definitely a different perspective.
Well, exactly. So just because this could be a national highway in Finland.
Yeah, and this is a quiet residential street, 2 parking lanes and 2 travel lanes. So most Calgarians would not even think twice about the width of this street. But wide streets lead to problems, right? Do you tell us what's wrong with wide streets?
So could you tell from the top of your head what is the distance from curb to curb here?
I wouldn't know off the top of my head, sorry.
Ish. 40, 50 meters?
I was out measuring one yesterday for a video I'm working on. I think it was, that was much narrower than this. That was maybe, I think it was 22 meters. So this one must be wider than that. I'd say this is probably 40 meters.
No, it can't be. It can't be that wide.
You think?
One lane would be like usually less than 4 meters, and if that's 4 lanes, that would be 16 meters from
16
curb
meters, maybe 20 or 30 meters. Someone here is suggesting 50 feet, which would be about 15 meters.
Yeah. Anyway, so residential street usually would be anything from like 5 meters to 6 meters here, if it has no other significance network-wise. And of course, if it has any significance network-wise, it wouldn't be a residential street only. So first of all, providing parking, which it's basically subsidizing public space for storing your private motor vehicles, your private metal boxes there. And as you see, there's no one parking here for a short distance at least, so it makes it like a 4-lane road or strode basically here, which allows people to drive way too fast. And at the same time, you're making sidewalks here which are like 1 foot wide.
Yeah, sidewalks are definitely too narrow. Yeah, thanks for the people in the comments here. Virtuous Sloth says he thinks the standard road right-of-way is 66 feet, including the sidewalk. And of that, the sidewalk is probably 3 feet on each side. So yeah, that is a big road.
And as we're talking about narrow sidewalks, later I'm commenting about sidewalk maintenance. But if the sidewalk is just 1 meter or 90 cents, if it's 3 feet, you cannot effectively maintain them with any machinery, because the machines that are just 1 meter wide don't have enough mass to deal with snow and hardpack snow properly.
Yeah, another great point. While you let this play, I want to ask a question to the audience, because somebody posed it, is like, what can you do about these wide streets? If they're too wide, and there's the self-fulfilling prophecy in lots of our North American cities where people who live on streets like this complain that too many car drivers are speeding, and they're speeding because the lane is so wide, it feels safe for them to speed. But at the same time, they worry about narrowing the lanes because we have gigantic vehicles and it's hard to drive on smaller roads. So it's a tricky proposition. I mean, you can definitely put traffic calming initiatives in there. You can put bike lanes onto these roads, and that narrows the travel width of the car lanes and slows down the vehicles, and also makes it a bit safer for cyclists to ride on that. Any other thoughts on that, Pekka?
Yeah, several actually. So, for example, if you still want to have street parking there, you could have, first of all, a bit less of that and make like parking pockets so that there's space for like 3 parking places. Then you've got some greenery, and then again 3 more parking spots, and so on. And especially in crossroads, it would be so much more important to narrow down, to make a neck down when you're approaching a crossing or what is called an intersection. So that way you could make the pedestrian crossings much shorter. That would be a really crucial thing to do because these are residential streets. There is absolutely no need for anything more than 2 cars to be able to pass each other, and that requires a space of 5 meters, maximum 6 meters. So you should make all of these intersections maximum 6 meter wide approach there with shortened crosswalks.
Yeah, Highways and Byways just made a great comment. I have about fire departments in North America always advocating for wider streets because they have giant trucks that don't fit down those streets, and and they position it as a safety issue. It's saying if your street's too narrow, you might not have great fire suppression service to that place. But like you said, highways and byways, that seems like a backwards argument. Just get smaller fire trucks.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember seeing a wonderful comparison about European versus American fire trucks. And anyway, they are not that big. If that street that we were just on was like 15, 20 meters wide, the fire truck is not going to be 10 meters wide. So 6 meter wide street, even if you make it like 8 meters or 10 meters, it would be still a huge improvement to the current situation, and you could still have 3 fire trucks pass each other.
I remember talking to a land developer once who was installing a lot of roundabouts in a residential neighborhood, and roundabouts are still fairly rare in my part of the world, and drivers hate them. And the developer said, "Yeah, they hate them because they do what they're supposed to do. They slow you down." I think narrow streets are the same. Drivers hate them because they do what they're supposed to do, which is slow you down. So I think we have a hard time keeping these two ideas in our heads simultaneously sometimes.
Yeah, it's so difficult to change anything that people are used to. All right, would you want to talk about that little yellow sign over there? So
Right. Yeah, you mentioned this earlier. So this is a playground zone. Um, so anytime there's a school or a playground, like with a playground apparatus, monkey bars or swings or slides, playing fields like soccer pitches or football pitches, things like that. The city puts these signs up and creates a pedestrian zone that lowers the speed limit to 30 kilometers per hour. But there are limited hours. I looked it up. It's 7:30 a.m. till 9 p.m. in which the speed is lowered. And that's a change in the last few years. It used to be 7:30 a.m. until 1 hour after sunset. But they simplified it and gave it fixed hours. And according to the city's website, which I looked up this morning, it's reduced collision with pedestrians in those zones by 33% just by adding those fixed hours to it. So I guess that's an improvement, but you were surprised to see these at all. Hey, Pekka?
exactly. So like I'm commenting there later on, seems like North America is obsessed with signs, imagining a tiny sign like that will just magically make things safer when you are not actually doing anything to physically limit the speed and speed times mass, which is the destruction energy that a car driver has on its hands.
You're so right about the signs. And I think once my eyes were open to the fact that we use signage to do so much, I can't unsee the superfluous signs on our streets now. And Collier in the comments makes a good point too. That's a lot of text on that side. Like you have a lot to read, especially if you're passing by in a motor vehicle. Oh, this is me suffering up the hill. In my poor bike, I had my internal geared hub had frozen on this day. And so I was stuck in the same gear. So I was struggling to get up this hill. I fixed the bike since then. I got an antifreeze lubrication inside the internal hub, so it's much better than it used to be. But this video was a struggle to get up this hill.
So there was a great comment earlier from Netherlands that fire trucks can even drive on the bike roads. So that is really, really a good point. So whenever you are building bicycle infrastructure that's good enough, and even if there's a gridlock or a total traffic jam, the emergency vehicles can still use the bike paths to pass through the traffic jam, and it's so easy to clear them out of traffic jam because the people riding their bikes can just hop away and pass. So it's another really good reason to have better infrastructure for people walking and cycling.
That's a great point. And for that to work, I guess you would need fire trucks that could fit on a bike lane, which I don't think we would have.
Well, here at least the maximum width of a fully like big as 60-ton truck is 2.5 or 2.55 meters, and even it's so heavy that it probably would cause some damage to the bike path. I don't know, probably because they are designed for the maximum weights of maintenance vehicles, which could be like 10-15 tons. Anyway, so that bidirectional bike path we had earlier is about the width of one car lane, isn't it? So it's 3 meters, 3.5, 375 even. So I'm totally 100 or 200% sure that a fire truck can fit that.
Yeah, on that bi-directional lane. That's a good point.
Yeah.
We do have narrower unidirectional lanes, but there's definitely space. There's no shortage of space on our streets.
There is no. I'm talking about space, just looking at this intersection again, makes me feel anxious.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. It's 5 streets coming together, and you really could, set up a football pitch in the middle of this, and you'd have this extra space. It's absurdly long. Just a quick shout out to John Michael. Thank you for the contribution there and your question. Have I ever done a video review on Japan? I have not visited Japan. Pekka, have you ridden your bike in Japan?
Still not yet. I really would want to go there someday. So if you, for example, if you know about bicycle advocacy groups or cities, especially in northern Japan, like in Sapporo or somewhere over there, that would be interested in organizing a winter cycling conference in the future, we are interested. So if you have good contacts regarding this, please let us know, because we are organizing an annual international winter cycling congress every year in a different city around the world.
Yeah, great point. It'd be great to go to Japan. That's where Pekka and I met, the first Winter Cycling Congress, when he picked me up at the airport in Oulu. So it would be great to get to Japan.
That was like exactly 10 years ago, and maybe a 1 week extra to that. So
was it? I remember that because you picked me up you had a bike for me, and I think that was the first time I'd ridden on the packed snow of Oulu's bike lanes. But we'll talk about that later. Let's save that one.
Yeah, we can. Should I just say that happy anniversary, Tom?
10 years. Wow. Feels like yesterday.
Oh, but this looks beautiful when you have the frost on the trees.
It was a beautiful day. Yeah.
But no words for this waste of space.
Yeah, this is an older residential neighborhood. Like, I think it goes back to the probably maybe even pre-war. And so not all residential neighborhoods are built this wide. This one is exceptionally wide, these streets. So I feel like we've gotten better over the years. I was in a newer suburb that's just under construction right now recently, and the streets are a lot narrower. So I feel like we've maybe seen the error of our ways in some cases.
Okay, I'm happy to hear that. And that's a good point from Rob again, imagining all the maintenance costs for all that asphalt. So at the same time, we still have original asphalt in many of our bicycle paths from the end of 60s, early 70s. It's not that good, but it's perfectly usable and should be renewed, yes, but during the latest 50, 60 years, how many times has the street next to it has been repaved? Probably many times.
Yeah, virtual. Virtuous Sloth made a point about North America. Most North American cities seem to have a small group of people who are recognizing that we could do things better. One thing that my YouTube channel has revealed is that's absolutely true. I hear from people in cities all over the world who are recognizing that there are ways of doing things better. So it's really gratifying for me to see that these conversations are cropping up all over the world. And Strong Towns is a great one. We should talk.
It is. It is. So we are again on a bike route, as you can see from this sign here. But there is no bicycle infrastructure. So are there shadows here?
No, I think there's no infrastructure here.
Okay. I don't count shadow as an infrastructure. So is there any place to paint called shadows here?
No shadows, nothing. No paint. It's just
Not even a shadow.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm guessing that this next street, is it the next street, used to be a through drive. So you were able to drive through from here. Am I correct?
Oh, yes. At one point it was. Yeah, they've closed this recently, so bicycles and pedestrians can still get through. They were trying to they're trying to reduce the cars turning off of that main busy road into this residential neighborhood, but they've allowed cyclists to go through.
I can't imagine how much less cars there is now on this residential street.
Yeah, the street that's coming up is quite busy. So I think it was years of complaints from the neighbors who live in that community about cut-through traffic. It's just west of downtown, so there's a lot of commuters going through there. So this was one of those instances where the city actually restricted automobile access to that neighborhood.
And at the same time, made also the automobile traffic more fluent.
Yes, yeah.
So restricting cars is good for car drivers.
And that might explain why those streets were so wide, because it was probably built originally to funnel a lot of commuter traffic through there.
Probably. All right, let's continue. And here there's this lovely bicycle crossing.
Yeah, this one's fairly new. There was often, on the other side of this intersection is a painted bike lane, which we'll get to in a minute. But only in the last, I'd say, 3 years was this bike traffic light installed. And so it is a nice change. It does give priority to cyclists when someone's in the intersection. It gets triggered when you arrive. Or actually, I think there's a big button, like a bike big button I have to push to get through. But it does clear the intersection for me to get through. So it's a nice improvement. Although now you have me thinking, Pekka, that I feel like I wait there an awful long time for the light to go green.
So before they installed the bike light, how were you able to get through from here?
No, you would just go on the pedestrian light or on the green traffic signal.
Also, there is a pedestrian light also. I didn't even notice that.
I think there is. It may not. It may be on the other side.
Yeah, there is over here. I didn't even notice that. But it made me think that when we're back here, a bit further ahead, so you're climbing uphill here. So this would be a perfect place for an underpass.
Yes.
Because you are going to climb up anyway. So when you're approaching from this direction, you just stay on level and go under the street and then just climb up the rest of the height because after you cross that street.
You made a good point about underpasses too, Pekka. Most of the pedestrian/cyclist access routes across busy roads here in Calgary are overpasses, and they're often quite narrow. They often take these absurd, you have to sort of ride in this spiral to get to the top, or a really long sloping one. But your point about an underpass was interesting in that it's nice for a cyclist because it gives you some downhill momentum that can take you up the other side as well.
Yeah, and you got the space on this side of like build an exit from the underpass as well. So you're not even, because in principle, I don't like underpasses because they are forcing people walking and cycling to go extra height meters, like go down and climb up again. And even though with underpasses you can use, when you're cycling, you can use the momentum to climb back up, it's still the bicycle that has to do the extra effort. and the car drivers get to go straight on the level. But here, in this case that we were just watching, it wouldn't even change anything for people walking and cycling.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I remember riding in the Netherlands one time. We were on a group ride with a city planner, and there was this underpass that had such a slight decline. I didn't even notice it. I'm so accustomed to having to climb, and it was such a decline. And the urban planner was like embarrassed about how steep it was, and I barely even noticed it. Like my North American brain could not even fathom this Dutch guy's concerns with this slight little decline.
Yeah, so for example, here in Oulu, we are now designing one of the new bicycle superhighways we are now designing here, planning. We've got like 4 or 5 which are being planned right now to be built during the next 2-3 years. So one of them, because of some underground infrastructure, like a really important water pipe or city-wide heating system or something like that, needs to have an extremely steep downhill, and that's like 4.5%.
Right. Yeah.
Which is still not that much. We would like it to be like 2 or 3, which is basically the slope sideways on the street.
Oh, I see. Okay. So that's the standard. That's the goal anyway.
That's the goal that we are trying to achieve, but that's probably something that the North American brain couldn't understand.
No, probably not.
All right. So, do I remember correctly that we have a bike lane here?
Yes, there is a painted bike lane underneath the snow here, but
Can you see it? Can't you see it? I mean,
you have to take my word for it. It cannot be seen.
yeah.
And I know on the street, if you let it play, the bike lane just disappears at one point. Like it's a painted lane, it gets to an intersection and then it's gone, and it picks up about 3 blocks later. So this is one of those gaps. You know, we even have gaps in our paint, so it can be a bit frustrating sometimes.
Oh yeah.
I just want to give a quick thanks to Tobin for the contribution there. Thank you. And he's asking for suggestions for cities in Canada or Europe with good cycling infrastructure that would be great for a vacation. In Canada, I would say Montreal. Montreal is my favorite bike city in North America. They've done some great work, and they're in the middle of adding a lot more infrastructure. So it's a great one. Vancouver's good as well. But in Europe, if you like winter, Alu in wintertime really opened my eyes to the potential of winter cycling. But of course, the big bike cities like Copenhagen and Amsterdam are great. Pekka, any hidden gems that people should know about?
So, for example, as mentioned, Copenhagen, it's kind of a hidden gem when it comes to winter. People don't talk about the winter aspect of Copenhagen. They still do have winter, although it's much warmer than what we have here. It is really good there, to my understanding, and I wish I would see that myself, because I haven't been there in the wintertime.
Yeah, I have visited Copenhagen in the wintertime, and you're right. There wasn't a lot of snow. It was wet and cold, but just to see so many people out riding in the winter was great for me to see too. And because it's Denmark, I was always impressed with how well dressed people were riding in the wintertime.
Exactly. And then there are a couple of good cycling cities also in Sweden on the west coast. I'm afraid to say them aloud because I'll say the wrong one anyway. So you can find it easily.
And someone here suggested New Orleans and Louisiana. Maybe not in wintertime, but I haven't been. But it's great to hear. I didn't know they were building a lot of infrastructure, so that's great to hear.
Me neither.
That seems like a great city to do it. Flat, lots of opportunity to build for equitable transportation, I think, there too. I'd love to see that. Malmo, another suggestion.
Yeah.
I haven't
Yeah,
been.
that's from Sweden, west coast, so Malmö.
Yeah, thank you for saying it properly.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, this is my favorite part of the ride up here. If you let it play, so this is where the bike lane picks up again. So there is a painted bike lane under here, which again, you can't see it. Yeah. But then there's a bridge here, like it's an overpass, and it gets so narrow that not only does the bike lane sort of disappear under the snow, but I felt really unsafe with cars passing me on the left. It's just so narrow.
So here we also see the end playground zone sign here. So we are still technically on the playground zone here on this slope.
Right. Yeah. Because there's a school right behind us, I think.
Yeah. And earlier we were discussing whether it's the case that you are not allowed to bypass a person cycling here with your motor vehicle. Is that the case?
Yeah. In a playground zone, the law says you cannot pass other vehicles. So I'm no lawyer, but I would say that probably applies to bicycles as well. So
Even if there's a separate bike lane.
if there's a bike lane, I think it's probably okay to pass. So that's it. That's a good question. I'd have to look the answer up on that one. I don't know how straightforward that would be.
All right. This section of the trip is nauseating.
Yeah. It's funny when you ride on these areas where I don't notice how close these things are. When I watch these videos back, I'm always sort of like, oh my God, that was a close call. And some of it is the distortion of the video, but when you're riding on these paint, like I'm basically riding on the paint there, which also gets slippery in the winter. Somebody else in the comments pointed this out earlier. And you're getting close past and you can't move to the right because all the snow has been thrown over there. Yeah, it's pretty hairy. It's not fun.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't ride it either. I can't blame anybody for riding on the sidewalk here.
Yeah.
And the scary thing with these is also when the snow is blocking the visibility of the bike lane surface is that what if there's a drain there hidden by the snow and you'll hit it?
You'll hit it. Yeah. Yeah. And there's the big trucks. We are famous for having lots of big trucks in the city.
Mm-hmm.
This is a long stretch on this residential road that does have a bike lane. Pekka, I think you commented how boring this was.
Yeah, I can see now.
As the neighborhood goes. I mean, this is one of those sort of traditional suburban neighborhoods where it's mostly 95% single family homes. And so if your idea of interesting is a variety of uses, then this is definitely not interesting.
And so, Tom, all of this area that we are now in this neighborhood, is that a 90-degree angle grid?
For the most part, I would say yes, probably is. Yeah. I think there's
So
a
that
few
is
curves here
what
and there. But yeah.
That is like the boring part of the grid. It's okay in the downtown and so on, but here, just imagine riding it yourself when you don't have the possibility to speed it up 12 times like I did.
Yes. And it, making a
You
point
have
about
the, yeah.
So I was going to say, like, having an interesting ride makes a difference too. I do think we don't talk about this in North America a lot, but I think some European cities talk about how to beautify rides or make sure that the route goes through an interesting place. I mean, on my daily commute to work, my route is not the most direct. I actually go through an area just because I like riding to that area. So it does make a difference if it's attractive.
So there's a concept of places. I don't know if that's exactly places in English, but in Finnish it is. So places are things along your journey that you recognize, you remember, and you think about them already in advance and during your ride. So I'm already in now this familiar place. Let's say it's a church or a beautiful tree or a nice park or a view to water or so on. So you basically not knowingly you are dividing your trip into phases between the places, and then the trip doesn't feel as long. I'm already here. It's such a short distance to the next place, to that waterfront, for example. And when people think like this, they are much more probable to cycle and walk longer distances.
Yeah, those are great points.
And here we don't have places.
Hey, Pekka, we're coming upon the 1 hour mark here, and I think there's probably people anxious to get out of Calgary. How do you guys feel? There's not a lot different from here to the destination. I feel like there's a lot of the same. Why don't we flip over and then we can talk about the interesting stuff in Oulu.
Yeah, share the road and shadows and
Sharrows. Oh, Sharrows. Does everyone know what a sharrow is? A shared right of way. That's the symbol on the street. It's basically nothing. It's just paint. It's supposed to designate an area in which motor vehicles and bicycles share the space. But there's a lot of confusion about what that means. In my experience, most motorists don't acknowledge it as being anything at all. And I actually think it makes streets more dangerous than having nothing because it encourages cyclists to go there, but then motorists don't acknowledge them at all. So it sort of creates these conflict points. So I don't know why they still exist. One was just proposed. I was reading a street redesign proposal in my city recently, and they proposed a Sharrow in there, and I couldn't believe these things are still in place.
Tom, it's totally agree with all of that, and we don't have shadows here. But actually, there's a couple of places in the city downtown where we should have shadows so that the people riding their bikes would know what is the difference of sidewalk and bike path, because there's a lot of sidewalks in the city of Oulu that look exactly like bike paths. The only difference is the sign or the lack of a sign. So in some cases, you basically could have a shadow just showing people cycling that you should be there on the drive lanes, which are perfectly good to ride on. And the intention of those shadows would not be to show motorists that this is a place where people cycling can also exist, but to inform people cycling that, hey, you should be actually over here. It's actually even safer for you.
Right. Okay. So they should not be banished from Earth. Thank you, Pekka, for that.
I don't know. Something I've been thinking about. So here was the attempted murder.
Yes.
On a
I laughed when
so
you said that, but it could be. It was a close pass in a big truck. Most drivers are great, I should say, are fine, but you do get some people who don't seem to understand that if you're driving behind a cyclist, it's okay to slow down and wait until it's safe to pass. People just seem to be determined to pass and not slow down or adjust their speed at all.
So here I wanted to ask, you could have probably entered this path already from the previous section. Could you have?
I think that's not a path over there.
Okay.
I think that's a sidewalk. So I rode a bit farther to take the official pathway entrance.
So that is an interesting point. How do you differentiate between the two? How do you know which one is and which one isn't?
Just from my experience riding there, I think when it's covered with snow, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
So when there is no snow, how do you tell the difference? There's this yellow stripe there.
A yellow stripe. Usually pathways are made of asphalt and sidewalks are concrete, but there are lots of exceptions.
Okay, so you can't know that. All right, so we are here.
It's a beautiful day.
It is. Beautiful day with at least 60 shades of gray. With illumination.
And we're coming upon one of those pedestrian overpasses across a road, a big 6-lane road. And this is another example of what Pekka said earlier about how the burden for crossing this goes onto the cyclist and the pedestrian to walk up the ramp and across, whereas motorists get to keep going straight through. Mm-hmm. And this is absurdly narrow. There's barely room for handlebars, and then when you've got a bit of snow packed in the corners, the traveling space is really small.
So Tom, if they get a lot of snow on the bridge, will they transport it away from there? Or is it just getting narrow and narrow and more narrow?
I think they just run a plowed right down the middle of it, and then we'll push it off to one side and then onto the grass at the other side, I think.
You can't, because there can be so much snow that you can't basically do that.
And then it sort of spills over to the sides.
But those rails or the walls are so high that it will happen so that when you're pushing the snow, some of it will go to the sides and then roll back under the machine that's blowing it, and thus creating a surface that it's not flat at all, and creating a really thick hard pack.
Right. Yeah. I don't know the answer, Pekka, but it's a good point. I'm not sure how they're cleared specifically. I'll have to keep an eye out for these things.
Yeah. And also what I was pointing here is that there's no illumination here. So when it's dark, these kind of places which are far away from anything else, and there's probably 2 people per day using these.
Yeah.
Be a scary place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you ever ridden this during the nighttime? You probably have.
At nighttime? Yeah, I think there are a lot of there's lights. There's some illumination from the street lights on the big highway down below,
Mhm,
but no, it's pretty dark. I think otherwise.
mhm.
And also a good point someone made that I was not. Nobody offered me crack when I did this
Exactly.
when I did this project with not just bikes. I was crossing an overpass like this, and there was two people
Yeah,
offering me crack on the way. So I guess that's an improvement.
yeah. So what do you think about the scoring here? So it says no crack cook. Oops, -2.
Oh yeah, you did mention that. I forgot about that.
Yeah, but I fix it. Wait, no, +1 for that actually.
Yeah. After I published this video, there's a section up here where I stopped my bike and then walked down the stairs. Somebody corrected me and said if I would have kept going straight here, the pathway does join with the other pathway. So I probably made a navigation error in turning left here and walking down the stairs, but also maybe that has something to say about wayfinding and lack of signage about that.
Exactly. I was just about to say the same thing because it should be obvious to the user so that you don't actually have to stop and think about where should I go.
Yeah.
So somebody has still cleaned the stairs.
Yeah, it looks like someone's brushed them. So one of the problems we have with snow clearing of pedestrian cyclist routes is that the city seems to have broken the responsibilities down into different departments. And so I
Mhm.
think there's a different department for clearing the overpasses than clearing the pathways. So often we'll get these situations in which, say, the approach to a overpass is cleared, but then it stops right at the end of the approach because the pathway crew hasn't been there yet. And so you can come down to
Mhm.
the bottom and you hit a bunch of snow. Or someone was telling me the other day where you could see the tracks of the plow for like a kilometer driving down the pathway with the blade up just to get to the overpass so they can clear the overpass. Um, so it was just this disjointed thing. And if they would have just put the blade down, it would have cleared the whole thing. But because there was this jurisdictional, organizational weirdness, it wasn't possible.
Exactly. So that actually does happen here, and I kinda understand it because you have a certain responsibility of something that you've cleared, and if you're doing something on a place where you are not supposed to do that, and somebody, for example, slips and falls down and breaks something, it could be a legal issue for them. But of course, that shouldn't be the burden of the end user.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
And so here's a comment from Dan saying underpasses are too hard to constantly clean and they can flood during the rain. So if those are problems, then your underpasses are designed wrong, totally wrong. So there needs to be a lot of space for, first of all, the maintenance vehicles. There needs to be space for snow if it's a winter city, and the magic word drainage, drainage, and drainage. So if you can't drain your underpasses, well, maybe you shouldn't build them then. But sorry for the little rant.
No, it's a good one. It's a great point. So this is a pretty safe pathway. It's away from roads. It's a multi-use pathway in a really wide utility corridor.
Mhm.
So it's fine. It's not there's a big 6-lane highway just to the right, but there's enough separation there that it's not the most unpleasant ride. So I didn't mind this part.
So this bike path ends here in the parking lot and doesn't continue anywhere.
Yeah, it just dumps me into this parking lot, and then I navigate this car park with on the roads like everybody else.
So if you're actually going somewhere further from here, do you have another path continuing after this?
You'd have to navigate your way through all these cars and then pick up the multi-use pathway on the other side.
So there is a multi-use path over there still.
I think there is, yeah.
Okay. All right. We're getting there.
We're almost near the end here. These giant car parks always surprise me in that they're bad for everybody. They have
Yeah.
one job, just to move vehicles around, and they're bad at that, and they're bad for pedestrians, and they're bad for cyclists.
Someday I would actually like to have a couple of extra coats and hang them over here. These coat hangers.
Right.
I wouldn't even necessarily understand that that's a bike rack.
Yeah. I don't know why
Design.
we have so many different designs. We should just find one that works and stick with it.
So you should have imagine having as many different designs for parking spaces for
Yeah.
cars, and then there's so many different designs which are so completely different from each other. Like this one.
Yeah, this one's bizarre. And so close to the wall, you can't even use it how it was intended.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a rant about bike racks. I did a video on them one time too, and I think someday I'll start an Instagram gallery of terrible bike racks or something like that, because there's some absurd ones out there.
Tom needs to remind us that Calgary was voted third most livable city by The Economist.
Yes, this is a good point. Thank you. It's easy to slag Calgary when we're talking about cycling, but we have done there's been great improvements over the last 10 years. I like living here. I've lived here my whole life. I've been raising my family here. It's got wonderful things going for it. It's clean, safe. Parts of it are beautiful. It's much better than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. So thank you for the reminder. We have ways to go on cycling, but it's a great place. Come and visit. You'll enjoy it.
Exactly. I certainly did enjoy when I was visiting, and not the least because it was -30.
Yeah, you were here on a very cold stretch. Okay, so there's Calgary. Thanks everyone for sticking with us. Now we'll switch over to we'll move over to Finland. And while you're getting that set up, Pekka, someone's asking about clothing in winter cycling. My go-to on when people ask about what to wear when riding your bike in winter is you don't need anything special for winter cycling. I think the mistake most people make is overdressing. I think people tend to wear too much clothing. I always compare it to cross-country skiing or Nordic skiing. You're going to move your body around and you're going to get hot and sweaty. So wear one layer less than you think you need. I have a friend who says, be bold, start cold. So that's a good one. Although I do hear lots of complaints from people about their hands and feet. So even if their body is warm, they get cold hands and feet. So I'd say pay a bit more attention to that. And if you, Pekka has ridden in more snowy places than anybody I know. So maybe you have some more advice there too, Pekka.
But you basically said all the most important things. Just put on anything that you would when you would be going on those temperatures anyway. And then, as you said, pay some extra attention to your toes and fingers. That's basically it. So we're in now.
This will be a change. Let's go.
Right.
And this is your single speed bike. No special tires on this.
No, just a regular upright single speed coaster brake. 85 years old, or 86 actually now.
86 years old. And it functions fine in the wintertime?
What's that?
It functions fine in the wintertime?
Oh, definitely. So when I got this, I was like going through full service because this was probably abandoned in the barn or something like 60 years. But when I was opening the rear hub, the grease was clean. I wouldn't have even needed to open it.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
These things are just so reliable and they go like a train. No cables to freeze, nothing like that.
I do love the coaster brakes on my bike. I've got a bike with them too.
All right.
Okay, so off the start here, so how would you describe this route? Is this a bike path, a multi-use pathway? What would you say this is?
So this where we are now on is an upgraded cycle path where people can also walk. It's divided. You can't see the division. We got 4 meters here for people cycling, actually 3.5 here, and 2 meters for people walking on the right side. And there's red asphalt for people cycling and black for people walking. Well, you can't see the difference here, but anyway, when people start to use it, they get used to it pretty quickly. And there's usually no problems with that. But we have to remind them once in a while, and we'll get to that in a second.
I think
that I'm doing the best ASMR winter cycling tour to know. Thank you.
Yes, I agree with that. One of the things that I think most people are always surprised about, and I was when I visited, is the packed snow. Do you want to talk a bit about how the routes are maintained with the snow here, Pekka?
Sure. So we mechanically plow these roads. So we don't use any salt and only blades with dense, tiny carbide toughened metal teeth, where with a gap of 16 millimeters, so that the ridges that they are creating are really, really tiny. So you can basically ride your road bike with slick tires on it, if you're a bit careful at least. So it's a common misconception that we are actively packing down the snow. No, we are not doing that. We are trying to keep the hardpack snow layer as thin as possible. And especially on the lower maintenance priority routes, it sometimes builds up too thick, and that can be a problem when the freeze and thaw cycles or the spring melt occurs. So when the hardpack snow layer is too thick and it starts to soften and melt, and it always happens unevenly. So when we are plowing this mechanically with the blades with tiny teeth, there's of course a tiny little bit of amount of snow left, and it can gradually build up. To prevent the buildup to become too thick, we need to plow it very often. It could be, for example, this 24/7 super maintenance class. It could be 100 times per winter. Sometimes 8 times per day if necessary. So it's 24/7.
It's hard to tell from looking at this video, but the packed snow offers amazing traction. I was quite tentative riding on it the first time, but it's I felt after about 6 seconds I felt comfortable riding on it, and I had no concerns about slipping and falling. How did this happen? Like, I've never seen this anywhere else, Pekka. Do you think this was just something that evolved in your city over time? Do you have great plowers or people who just really care? How did this happen here? Or is this a standard that you see elsewhere as well?
So you see, basically the same method is used anywhere else and everywhere else in Finland as well. So we are just people started when they started doing winter maintenance in cities. I would imagine that they just used tractors because they had them, and then they added some buckets or plows to them, and then just pushed the snow away. And when we had bicycles, people would just ride on them because it was possible to do so. So I would figure that the same thing happened in the US and Canada as well. I don't know. I have no clue. If you know better, I would be interested to know that. But then somebody came up with these four letters SAL and T, salt, which is oftentimes used way too much and in bad ways. And don't get me wrong, there's certainly cases where salt can be a good thing and can be a good solution, but oftentimes people are just using it wrong and too much.
Great. Somebody asked here, how do they set the blade height? Do they use sensors, or how do they know how thick the snow is?
They don't, but you're just like you need to have enough mass on the vehicle. So, for example, tractors we are using on this maintenance class are like 6 or 7 tons, which is basically maybe the minimum. And you are just well, probably from experience, you are just like pushing down the blade, and the teeth are not sharp, but sharp enough to remove the snow, but they are kind of rounded, so they don't eat the asphalt with the correct type of blade. There are several different types of blades with individual teeth that would remove also the asphalt if you use them wrong. But those are not allowed on the bike paths.
There's a little glimpse of the Pekka masterclass in bicycle snow plowing. Sign up now.
Exactly, masterclass that city.
Yeah. I mean, the plowing of the multi-use pathway system in Calgary is also quite good. And it only started around in the 80s, and it started with a bunch of volunteers. People would rig up homemade plows to drag behind their bikes because they wanted to keep riding in the wintertime. And they got so good at it that one year there was a great big snowstorm in the spring, and it was too much snow for these homemade plows to get through. And then City Hall was flooded with complaints from people saying, "Why haven't you cleared the pathways?" And City Hall was like, "We don't clear the pathways." Anyway, that was when the city realized that there's a need to have these what were considered recreational routes available in the wintertime. And so We have a good network of pathways in Calgary, and a lot of them are plowed. So that's one of the great parts about winter in Calgary.
That's in a way what you just described. It's beautiful, but also in a way it's a kind of sad as well. Don't you think?
It is sad. And there was a story just this week, a Calgary cyclist who talks about riding to work every day with a shovel because he often has to stop and shovel his way through where he needs to get.
So, if I remember correctly, you are making a comment here about the bikes and the clothing people are using.
Yeah, it's always surprising to me that people are riding everyday bikes. They're not dressed for athletics. I don't see a lot of helmets. I don't see a lot of fat bikes. What do you think accounts for that, Pekka?
As cycling is considered a totally normal way for getting from A to B, and you're usually dressing for the destination. Of course, in the wintertime, you might have an extra layer called a jacket, for example.
Yeah, it is a different culture of cycling. We're getting more of this in North America too, but we still get, if you're a bike commuter in the wintertime here, most people, wear the athletic clothing and they get geared up for it and they ride. A lot of that I think is because of the distances are quite long, and that's fine. I always say, like, dress whatever you want, wear whatever you want to wear as long as you ride the bike.
Exactly. And one thing which I could figure could contribute to that is that here in Oulu, you almost never have to share the same space with motor vehicles. So you don't have to dress yourself as a crossing over a Christmas tree and a traffic sign
Yeah, absolutely.
to stay alive. All right. So earlier I was talking about this being a divided path, and in the winter time the snow is covering the markings, so we are installing these projected traffic signs. So there's a lamppost here on the left.
Right.
Here you can see the projector just shining a bit below the lamppost, which is projecting the traffic signs onto the surface, knowing that people who are cycling, they should be on the left side, and people who are walking should be on the right side. And we are currently installing these, when we are upgrading a path to a bicycle superhighway standard, we are installing these basically like 1 per kilometer. And sometimes people are commenting like, isn't that expensive? You're wasting money for that or something. Projector like that, you can buy it off the shelf. It's like 2,000 euros. You just need custom lenses for that. So illumination on our bicycle superhighways, which is already higher standard than regular cars, costs about 50,000 euros per kilometer. And when you add one projector per kilometer, total cost per kilometer is 52,000 euros. So what a waste of money is that?
Yeah, that's a great perspective.
And with the publicity, the international media coverage that we've gotten just from these projected signs, you could say that just justify this all with marketing, even if you would like to put it that way. All right.
And so these seem really wide also, and that's because it's intended for both cyclists and pedestrians. There's sort of designated space for each.
Exactly. And so this is a section of our first bicycle superhighway, which was a total of 5.6 meters in width, and it was too narrow, so this is not wide enough. So all the others built after these are 1 meter wider, so 6.6 meters.
And it's lit, like even these areas that go through parks and natural spaces has great street lighting as well.
And that's really important because people really need to feel safe, otherwise they don't go there. And you know that back in the 60s, when they started designing this kind of paths for the first time, there was a lot of opposition. Many planners were saying that people will be afraid to walk and cycle on those paths when there's no streets next to it. And I guess it was difficult to come by that argument, but our planners still managed to stand their ground. I'm so happy about that. Such
And
a good.
that's another thing that's interesting about Oulu is that this is not like an Amsterdam or a Copenhagen with a medieval dense core. Um, the city has suburbs, has single family suburbs. In some ways, it's like a North American city, but and this bike infrastructure hasn't always been there either, right? Was being built in what, the 70s. Things started to evolve this way. How did things get to where they are now?
Well, we were kind of lucky that the city was relatively small. It was just like 20, 30, 40,000 people in the 50s. And in the 50s, in our post-war society, people started concentrating from the countryside to the cities, and cities started to grow rapidly. And we didn't even have any traffic planners in the city in the 50s, and in the 60s they hired the first guy to do that. And luckily they chose a guy who understood the importance of walking and cycling, Mauri Myllylä, who was of course facing a lot of opposition and a lot of criticism. And for example, during some years of his work, he was told by his supervisors that you can only use 10 minutes per day for walking and cycling. Everything else for cars.
It's just something that was important to him, and he's got a legacy now that has changed the way the city has evolved. Amazing.
Exactly, and he used really like ingenious ways to find arguments for good cycling and walking network. Like there was the 70s and the oil crisis. It was easy to use the argument of bicycle network, a separate bicycle network, as a backup if there's no oil left anymore. So like a backup for energy crisis. And in the Cold War society, they were building a lot of underpasses that could be used as bomb shelters.
Oh, interesting. So he would sort of find arguments wherever he could.
Exactly. And then 60s, 70s, 1971, they finished the first master plan of bicycle networks here in Oulu. And they had the basic principle of creating straight connections from the city center to the surrounding suburbs, which were built. Some of them existed at the time already, but they were starting to build new suburbs. And while you're building and expanding the city, it was really important and a really good decision to include the main bicycle corridors when you were building them. So, of course, it's much more difficult to retrofit them afterwards.
Well, it's pretty amazing to see this now.
It is. But in the 90s, when he retired, we kind of were already the best city for cycling, and you could reach every place by cycling. So the ambition to develop things even further kind of died for 20, 30 years. And if we would have had the same ambition during those 20, 30 years, who knows where we would be now.
Right. So now we're into downtown now, right?
Yes, we are there. And the reason why the infrastructure is like you see it is not ideal is that in the 1971 master plan, the city center was left out of the plan. And in 1983, they made a new plan with a totally wrong infrastructure solution, just mixing pedestrians and people cycling on the sidewalks and call them bike paths and put up a sign saying that this is not a bike path, which visually could be totally similar than a sidewalk, the only difference being the sign or the lack of it.
How do you? So downtown now is mostly shared space, right? Like the separation that you have out in the suburbs. Oulu's a bit different than most cities here in North America, in that the best bike lanes are downtown, the best separated bike lanes, and then as you get out to the suburbs, it gets worse. But it's almost the opposite in Oulu, correct?
This we do have the pedestrian area, which has been there for 36 years now, which was a great change. But the city center of Oulu is relatively small, so even if the less ideal bicycle conditions in Oulu are in the city center, it's not that big of a problem. We still need to fix a lot of things here. For example, the street that we are on now is a bicycle street, which you can't see. Basically, you can see the sign here. So that includes that it's a 30 kilometer per hour maximum speed limit, you are not allowed to overtake people on bikes, and the bicycles have the absolute priority. But this is basically a parking lot because the city didn't care to remove car parking from this. And it's a dead end for people in motor vehicles, but not for bicycles. So you can maybe see in the.
I see. Okay. Yeah, Pekka, your mic is choppy again. Did something change, or is it
No.
just bandwidth maybe? Well, this is an interesting bicycle street. I wasn't sure what you meant when you mentioned bicycle street, but now that explanation certainly helps. Cars are allowed on the street, but it's sort of deprioritized. It's made easier to ride a bike, and car drivers are sort of second priority.
Exactly. And it's a dead end for people in motor vehicles, so you can basically only drive there to park.
Right, right.
And the bicycle street continues here.
Does this get quite busy during busy weekdays?
Well, yes and no. It gets too busy with motor vehicles still, unfortunately.
You'd like to see more restrictions on motor vehicles. Yeah.
You should have physical restrictions there, especially.
Well, I was going to say this looks like a really well plowed area, but that's not the case, is it?
No, it's no. So there's a citywide heating system, a central heating system, and so there's hot water circulating from which is warmed up in the one power plant that's circulating citywide in the residential buildings and apartments and so on. Even single family houses can join. And when the water is returning, it's guided through pipes underneath here, and they keep it clear of snow.
So the heat is almost a byproduct. It wasn't built specifically for this. It was built to serve hot water to the residents, and this is sort of on its way back. It also has a side benefit of keeping this free of snow.
Exactly. But of course, you need to install the pipes here so that it actually keeps the whole area clean, and so that there's not just a single pipe somewhere.
Do you have any sense of the difference in cost between a system like this versus paying people to shovel or plow it?
I don't, unfortunately, but I'm pretty sure the city does have that.
It'd be interesting to see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a good point in the comments there. It's a great use of waste heat.
Exactly. And still, it's not completely waste heat because the water is still cooling down here and you need to still warm it up again. So it does create carbon emissions that way too. So it's not completely as good as it maybe sounds.
Another good point in the comments too is about the illumination. It seems like a really well lit area.
It is. And you said here something about bike parking, I think.
Yeah, look at that. Bike parking is an underappreciated element of bike-friendly cities. I get notes from people all the time who say, "Oh, my city's getting better at building bike lanes, but I can't park my bike anywhere. I feel I don't have a safe place to leave it." It is a real barrier in a lot of places too. So it's good to see so much bike parking in prominent locations there.
So Tom, in that regard, how much do you think it comes from people using maybe, I don't know, on average more expensive bikes over there than over here?
Do you mean that people would demand better parking because they have more expensive bikes? Do you think
Over there, because I would think, I don't know if that's true. Uh, Here you can use just any bike that moves, a POS, basically a piece of shit that costs you 20 euros. Of course, many people are using more expensive bikes, so they are not that worried about one of them getting stolen because just 20 bucks and you buy a new one, or 100 euros, or then your home insurance covers it like it usually does. Of course, it's still really irritating to get your bicycle stolen.
Yeah, I think bike theft is a huge problem. I think it discourages a lot of people from riding because they're afraid of it. I think people who have expensive bikes don't ride because they are afraid of it getting stolen. Bad bike parking is part of the problem. Bad, and indifference in policing is a problem. It's a huge issue that is underappreciated. I think it's a huge barrier to bike friendliness in general. Not an easy one to solve, but things can be done, but not many cities are doing them.
Exactly, and you just posted a fresh video about that topic. That was a really good one, especially with the conclusions. What can the city do about it? So please, everyone, go watch that on Tom's channel if you can.
Thank you for the shout out there.
You're welcome. So here I wanted to say that there was red lights here. I was originally planning to go straight ahead here, but because there's bike routes literally everywhere, I can just change my route on the fly because it was a green light when I was turning right. So what the heck? Let's just go here.
Is this the first red light we've seen?
No, it's the second one.
Compare that to mine, where we had about 6 in the first minute.
Yeah. So this is basically just a.
Excuse me.
This is something that should be a sign, but with the addition of a sign saying it's a bike path and divided or shared with pedestrians, it is now a bike path legally, and then you have to also ride it. But visually, it's no different from sidewalks.
Yeah, this doesn't look great. I mean, compared to some of the other parts of the city, you know, if it was busy with pedestrians and cyclists stepping out of the buildings, it looks like there's potential for conflict there.
Mm-hmm. But there is so many people are cycling here, even in the city center, that people walking know to expect them, and they also cycle themselves there. So that's another reason why they know to expect people cycling. And so I think that contributes to us having a bit less of those conflicts. It's still not ideal, but compare that to having, for example, on-street bike lanes on the same streets over there, or converting them into bicycle streets completely, where you would still have the car traffic. The motor vehicles would destroy the surface, and it would be much harder to maintain because if there's fresh snow, the motor vehicles are packing it down much faster, and it's resulting in an uneven surface that would need even more heavy machinery and much more frequent plowing to keep it good and cyclable surface.
Yeah,
So it's
great point.
a trade-off there.
I like the in the comments. There's a nice mix of Canadians and Finns. You can tell. Whoever said that there's too many traffic lights must definitely be a Finn.
And this is a nice underpass here. It's also heated with the same system.
Yeah, this is an interesting one too. Like it's a good example of what we were talking about earlier around how the benefits of underpasses. But to have it well lit and cleared like that is really nice.
Plus the drainage, and with the heating, there's no need for snow plowing.
Yes.
So we are basically going under several rail tracks there, plus a street.
And the lighting is important in underpasses. We had underpasses going under rail tracks here as well for years that were badly lit, and they were dark and dingy and scary, and people avoided them. And we've done a pretty good job over the last few years rebuilding them with more space and more light, with art. It just makes the whole experience better.
It does. There's so much street art also in many of our underpasses. I really like it.
Oh, I called an American a Finn, so I was not correct there.
Yeah, but I'm with you there. Unconventional ideas. I just really hate traffic lights. And as I was saying later in my video, in the conclusions, that the traffic lights basically just exist to make motor traffic possible in the first place. So if we didn't have so much motor traffic, we wouldn't have the need for traffic lights at all. And Ari is also commenting about the voice quality. That is a problem. I've been trying to solve it for the whole day. For some reason, my laptop doesn't recognize my headset and is still using my laptop's own microphone. And I'm sorry, I can't do anything to it right now. But if you have good examples or good tips to me how to get Windows 10 to actually recognize a separate headset, it does recognize the speakers here, but not the microphone for some reason. Just let me know if you can help me.
And so we're out of downtown now and heading out towards more into the suburban areas.
Exactly. And this is also one of the upgraded bicycle superhighways. So
Are you
whenever
still use, are you still
it's
using that term? Sorry,
sorry?
are you still using that term bicycle superhighway? It's been a bit controversial in some cities, that
Yeah, I
word.
understand. Because we don't use that word in Finnish. We just use the word called bana, which is coming actually from Sweden and meaning a track, like a railway track.
Okay.
Because ever bicycle superhighway in Helsinki was built in an unused railway corridor, and it was called bana because of that. And now it's become a common name to mean all the bicycle superhighways. So I don't know what would be a good term that I could be using in English language. In Finnish, I just call them bana.
Yeah, I know this came up in London when I was there recently because they've had cycling superhighways for about a decade now, and they've stopped calling them that. Um, the concern was that they were creating the perception that these were only for like really fast moving bikes,
Mhm.
and there was some concern it was discouraging slower moving people, or moms with kids or older people from using them. And so I think they're just calling them cycle tracks or something like that now too. So it's a semantic
Uh,
argument, but this stuff does matter.
it does, and the language and the words and the phrases we're using have a huge impact of the way of our thinking, subconsciously and consciously. Like when we are saying that that car was driving, no, it wasn't. It was a driver, and we are like diminishing the driver. Totally, there's a person with responsibility there behind the steering wheel.
Absolutely.
On your point about London's super highways, mostly I wouldn't call them super highways just because they're so narrow and the infrastructure is oftentimes a bit poor. They are improving finally, and they're doing good job there. But maybe in terms of infrastructure quality, you could actually call our Banas bicycle superhighways. But then there's still the argument that you made about them being only for really fast bicycle traffic, which they are not, of course.
Yeah, that was my experience in London as well. Some parts of the superhighways were great, nice and wide, but others not so great. Although I did see a news report just this week that bicycle traffic has overtaken motor vehicle traffic in downtown London for the first
Yes,
time. So
I saw the
that's
same.
they seem to be working. Yes, and
That was fun.
we do use greenway. Greenway is a term that's used a lot as well, sometimes in different contexts. Greenways, I've seen everything from bike paths to multi-use pathways to residential roads, all called greenways. So we should probably get our act together and find some consent on which
Mhm.
words we use for these
Maybe.
sorts of things.
And so greenways, we want to differentiate these banas or bicycle superhighways from the regular greenways because we got 940 kilometers, 950 kilometers of regular greenways, and maybe 20 kilometers now of these bicycle superhighways. So I don't know, should we call them super greenways or something? I don't know.
Yes, super greenway. I like that.
Uh-huh. All right.
And then these are just nice. So this looks like you're riding through the middle of a forest. What kind of like community? What kind of neighborhood are we riding through right now?
So there's big apartment buildings on the left side of the picture you can see, and there's just like a small green corridor here, and we are getting closer to a what is called like a ring road around the city, and we don't even notice it because we are going just through an underpass, which by the way is too narrow and it's going to get rebuilt soon. But the ring road has a green belt around it here, and what you are seeing now here when you're riding your bike, you're basically just seeing the forest. There is
Right.
a which is a collector street. You could even maybe call it the stroad, not the stroad. No, I'll just call it a collector street. But it's a bit further away, so it's so comfortable to ride here. And this bike path was built originally in the 60s, but just upgraded to this super greenway standard a couple of years ago to just make it a bit wider, keeping it windy to preserve the original nature of the path because it was going through the woods and making these curves.
And you made a point here about the wayfinding, good
Mhm.
signage, and that had distances to destinations as well, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
So
that's helpful.
the adding of these signs, we did this project a few years ago, adding a total of 7,700 signs in the city region wide in one project. So the most important things was including these advanced signs. So already before the intersection, you have the knowledge of where you need to go, which roads go to which way. We have the route numbers and some symbols like the airport or the city center, and then there's distances also here. And when you're approaching the actual intersection, you've got the more conventional signs over here, which which in my opinion still have too small text here, even though it's bigger than what it used to be before. But I guess we'll have to make do with what we have now.
This route looks a lot like some of the multi-use pathways that in Calgary they go through parks, and they're beautiful routes, but they're not often great for transportation. They're usually recreational routes, and they take these long curving routes through parks and don't really take you to a destination. But that's not the case here, is it?
No, not really. And here I just wanted to comment a little bit about the underpasses previously. So what you can't see here is that there's a what's it, drain here and over here, and also on the other sides. And this is still not ideal because there should be basically a ditch both sides of the path. So this is too narrow. I really mean it, even though it's kind of tongue in cheek to call it a hellhole because it's well lit and the geometry is quite good. And I'm not sure. Maybe you could even call it inviting. At least it's not uninviting. But they are going to rebuild this ring road, unfortunately, adding more lanes there. Come on, even in Oulu. And at the same time, they are going to make these underpasses better, at least.
Yeah, it looks far from a hellhole to me.
So there's a comment about the headphones in the chat. Thanks for HUI. So this one here is a really, really good quality from Rode or Rode. And the microphone is good also, but the Windows just doesn't recognize the microphone. So I unfortunately can't use it. And I can't upgrade the driver because the Windows doesn't even recognize that there is a device that I should be able to upgrade the driver for.
Well, let's keep going, Pekka. I think we can make up most of what you're saying. And there are times when it sounds great and times when it doesn't. So let's just hope all your great points come at a time when it's working really well. Yeah, there's a dark point. Do you remember what time of day you were riding here? I mean, illumination is important in winter in us northern cities. You're a lot farther north than we are. So how much light are you getting on days like this?
Yeah. So if I remember correctly, I started like 15 something p.m. It's probably like 4 p.m. here now as we're riding. And this was sometime in January when I was recording this. So we are close to the darkest times of the year, but it's not the darkest day. So the shortest daylight amount that we get is like 3.5 hours. And then correspondingly in the summertime, we got like almost 24 hours of sunlight.
Yeah. And we just passed through what looked like a single family residential neighborhood. Is that correct?
Exactly.
And is this a bike route or is this shared with motor vehicles?
So this is a street with no separate bicycle infrastructure other than the signs showing you the route numbers. So there's a pink sign saying that this is around number 8, I think, or 9. But all of these streets are dead end for motor vehicles. So, and there's probably less than 20 houses here. So it's almost never that you see even a single car here. And there's basically no on-street parking. So it's not a problem. It wouldn't make any sense to build a separate bicycle path here. Because it would be just extra maintenance cost, extra asphalt, and less space for people to actually live in.
Wow, we've even got full-time audio engineers on this call.
Oh yeah. I would like to dive in deeper with this later with you, Richard, and help you. I would really appreciate this. I've been trying to figure out this for ages.
And so now this is a similar. What is outside here? Is this a green space again through residential neighborhoods, or is it a park?
So this is just a green space, and we are now going under the national highway, which is 100 kilometers per hour with four lanes, I think, in this place. And there's a little bit of forest on both sides of it to get less noise pollution.
It's
And
it,
and looking at it, you can see that the underpass is perfectly straight level. There's a 0.0% slope here, so this is
right.
good. Even though the underpasses are quite old, I think these are from the 70s, and these are more like the tunnel type of underpass. What people often think when we are talking about underpasses, but these are not ideal. The previous one, which was much more open, spacious, much more well lit, is what we are doing nowadays, and we're actually doing them better than that one.
Yeah. And it feels like the whole network is, we're not even seeing motor vehicles or car traffic or anything. Is it two separate networks in areas like this? There's roads in one area and then bike pedestrians completely separately?
So that was a great point that you made, that we indeed do have separate networks. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they go in exactly the same corridor, like for example here. But when they're separated with a small green space and space for snow, it's really good. And in addition to that, we also have Nordic skiing trail network within the city of about 350 kilometers. It's not as complete as the bike path network, but sometimes you could even ski to work if you want. And we are now building a single track network for mountain biking, trail running, and hiking and so on within the city as well.
Yeah, I mean, these are great routes. They just seem so, it doesn't even feel like you're in a city.
Exactly. One of the small differences or big differences to my experience comparing these to Northern American cities is that we have left small amounts of nature within the suburban neighborhoods here, and we are utilizing those also for the bicycle corridors. So even if it looks like we are just going through forest all the time, we are in the middle of neighborhoods, in the middle of suburbs. There's, for example, a school right there on our right hand, and the supermarket on the left hand, and the playground over here, and row houses on the left. And so all the time, if you would be looking at this satellite image, you would see how it goes.
It's interesting because often in North American cities, the worst places to ride your bike are in the suburbs because there's no accommodation anywhere. The distances are really long, but this kind of shows that you don't have to have. This shows that it's possible to build a suburb, a single family suburb, in ways that make it easier for people on foot and on bikes.
Exactly. And you could do so much because I love maps, and I oftentimes can forget myself within just looking maps and satellite images from different places around the world, even the US sometimes. And just looking that if you just added a small connection to that dead end residential street and that one, and make it like a backyard connection to a trail that's got over there, you could achieve so much in your cities. Or if it's an older suburb with a street grid, just cut this one and this one and this one for motor traffic, but let bikes and people walking go through. You could create like a hierarchy there that would make so much sense, and it would be actually really cheap to build.
Yeah, great point.
All right, yeah, getting there.
And there's a comment about the North American tendency to clear cut. I think that's probably true. We also have a tendency to pour concrete everywhere. I've been seeing lots of video lately from light rail in cities where the rail tracks run through grass or run through parks, whereas in North America they tend to be like gravel, concrete, asphalt locations. So it's kind of an interesting way of looking at them things differently.
So
here we go, a big box shopping location. I like this too. It's like, see, even in Finland, there's terrible car-centric big box shopping. But
exactly, and so like I was saying it to you also earlier, so we are basically a Northern American car-infested city with suburbia and hellscapes and so on. But we just have a decent bicycle infrastructure network added to it. So that's basically the only difference.
Yeah, which is why I think the city is so interesting. Like it's sometimes when you talk about Copenhagen in North America, people tune right out because I think they feel like it's Mars or something. But this is a city that's not that different from what we built here. And there we go, a proper, well, that's not a great bike rack either, but it works.
It's not that bad actually. So these traditional wheel benders, as some people say, they are not as bad when you install them on the wall. They are a bit higher, so the supporting point is a bit higher. And when you're using these with your regular POS bikes, it's not that big of a deal. And most bikes have their own kickstand anyway.
Right. Yeah, that would be a difference here too.
The rack was installed upside down, so this part that extends further from the wall should be on the upside. And not
Yes, yes. And there we go. We made it. We made it to the hardware store. Well, there we go. So it's interesting, you know, I think it's really fun to compare cities this way. I get some Calgarians who tell me that's not a fair comparison. It's not a fair competition. And I always say, well, it's not really the point. The point is just to see how different cities do things differently. And so thanks, Becca, for doing this. This was really interesting. And it's always great to have your insight. You have so much knowledge about winter cycling that I learn something every time I talk to you. So thanks for doing this.
Thank you so much, Tom, for doing this as well. It's a pleasure. We've been here chatting 2 hours and it feels like 15 minutes.
Yeah, we could keep going for all day, I think, too. But thanks to all of you who participated and sent questions and spent your time with us today. We appreciate it. If you have any other questions or video ideas for either of us, please let us know. We're always looking to spread the gospel of good winter cycling cities and good practices. So don't be shy. Let us know what you think. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.